This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek.fm.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Welcome to The Edge, Trek FM's dedicated podcast to Star Trek Discovery. I'm your host, Patrick Devlin, and joining with me, as always, is my friend, Amy Nelson. Amy, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. So excited to be back talking Discovery with you.
Yeah, we've had a couple weeks off here, and I'm glad to be back at it. I've had a rough day, but this should be fun.
Yeah, good way to end your day.
Yeah, definitely. And we have a special guest, as always. Today, though, our special guest is Nic Anastassiou, associate producer of Standard Orbit. How are you, Nick?
I'm great, and very, very happy to be back on Trek FM and on The Edge with you guys. Awesome to have. Awesome. I haven't chatted Discovery with the Edge host for quite a while, so I'm super excited.
Yeah, I don't think you've been on this particular Edge yet, right?
You've been on Postcards.
On
yes,
others.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. One of the spin-offs.
Right.
Yes.
So with Amy. So I mean, really, that's the important one, right?
Well, all you need to know if you want to follow Trek FM is follow Amy.
Yeah. So real quick though, what's your impression of the first season of Discovery?
It's overall, I like it a lot. It's very good. I think that there is, it's not perfect. There are, for me, I wouldn't say problems. There are things that, if you get analytical, I feel like at times you can see kind of the showrunners, I guess with time, my perspective would be trying to figure the show out as they go, which again, with perspective, is not that unusual for a show in its first season. That's kind of what happens. And I think if you take that into consideration, I would certainly say it's even if I took the most critical approach, I would say it's by far not the most chaotic, sort of wobbly first season of a Star Trek series. TNG is one of my favorite Star Trek series. It's always in contention with TOS as my favorite, and we don't need to get into it. We all know, everyone knows how wobbly the first season of TNG was, and they really, they had a lot of great ideas and a lot of stuff which was seeded and grew into the TNG that we love, that came from season one. But they really didn't really know. They were looking for what the show was about, what the tone was, what the characters were. And so there was a lot of hits and a lot of misses, a lot of really big misses. So I think overall, I see season one of Discovery is more a hit than a miss for me in most areas. If anything, I think that it's kind of like because it's also, I think, the episodic nature, how does you go? Because you can see, since they're stuck with one story, and you can see them kind of trying to figure out the characters and the plot as they're going. And so at times it kind of creates these really sudden changes or things which are not completely consistent tonally or character-wise from one episode to the next, which is sort of like kind of a head scratcher. But it's none of it really, really kind of took me out or made me get to a point where I didn't like the show. And I'm one of the, I guess, a minority, it seems like, the more I hear people who actually really loved the last two episodes more so. I thought this is where it became Star Trek. They really kind of proved the point of starting from where they started in terms of the universe and then getting to a place that's closer to the Star Trek that we know. And the last two episodes, the last one in particular, really kind of sold that idea for me. And we can talk about it tonight because it's related to Stamets also. I think that character really showed that arc very well.
Okay, so you hinted we're going to talk about Stamets tonight, but yeah, I definitely don't share the belief that the last episode was great.
Yes,
I'm definitely in that camp. But
I've heard you talk about it before.
yeah, everyone has. I got yelled at a lot, but okay. So I do agree that they were actually trying to do what you said, but I just didn't feel it would. You know what it was with Discovery for me? There's a lot of little things that went wrong, and any one of them is not really that big of a problem. But the totality of them all kind of bothers me.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, and there's one thing you said, which I think is I would even agree with, even though I love the show. One thing that I would critique it for, or at least note, is at times it feels like the show is not quite as genuine as it could or should be. I feel like at times the writers and the producers are too aware or trying to be aware of what writing for Star Trek should be, what directing for Star Trek should be, what a Star Trek line of dialogue should be. And instead of just doing it, I'm like, okay, I can see you kind of outside your own mind saying, oh, we should do this particular plot point, this particular scene, because that's very Star Trek-y. And by doing that, it becomes less of a genuine Star Trek moment, because you can kind of feel them trying to create Star Trek instead of just creating good science fiction and doing it without really trying too hard.
I absolutely 100% agree.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I mean, look, it's the first time they're doing this fully serialized, right? Serialized or episodic? Mm-hmm, serialized version of a show. It shouldn't be just like TNG. Mm-hmm. And it shouldn't be like Voyager and Deep Space Nine and TOS, because they were different styles of shows. Mm-hmm. And it seems like every time they tried to shoehorn those ideas into the show, it kind of fell a little flat for me. But overall, I do love the show. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. So
yeah,
right.
Yep. So, all right. So we got into it. We're going to talk about Stamets overall, not just Discovery and what I didn't like about it, because you can go back and listen to plenty of that. So, Amy, would you like to introduce Stamets?
Sure. So we have Lieutenant Paul Stamets, and we learned that he's part of the team that discovered the spore drive. He was trained as an astromycologist, but with this war now, he's now on this military starship Discovery. Don't think he likes that too much. He is the chief engineer, and we find out, his partner is Hugh Culber. Now, interesting enough, Lieutenant Stamets is named after a real-life mycologist, which I think is funny. They just put astromycologist. So I don't even know if astromycologist is a real thing, but mycologist Paul Stamets. And if you're interested to know more about him, he appeared on After Trek episode 2. So you could go back on your CBS All Access and watch that if you missed that.
So ironically, I didn't know about this mycologist Paul Stamets. And I happened to listen, before I got on to this podcast, I was listening at work, and my partner was actually the owner's son. Don't ask why he was talking about shrooms. But we were partnered together listening to The Edge, and he said, "Oh, Paul Stamets, the mycologist." I went, "Well, yeah, but he's an astromycologist." He goes, "No, I went and saw him speak. I went to a party with him." So I actually found out about this through my partner at work, who's my boss's son. But and we had a long conversation about that. Now he's a big he listens to this podcast. He listens to Warp 5, and he actually listens to Your Earl Grey. But and he watches Discovery. But
that's cool.
So it was an interesting twist that I just happened to find out that he's named exactly after some famous mycologist who knows everything about mushrooms, and it just happens to be mushrooms. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now it's funny. You also mentioned you don't think he likes being on Discovery. You didn't happen to read the comic book, did you?
No, I did not.
Did you, Nick?
I did not either. I mean, I heard Bruce and Dan cover it. It's kind of I'm a cheater basically, and the way that I read my Star Trek books is Bruce and Dan are my personal audiobook readers.
Through literary treks. Yes, excellent.
Exactly.
I didn't do a literary treks, but I did an Edge with Brandon, Bruce, and Dan about that. Right. I don't know if they did a separate one, but
It was probably that one.
So I had to listen to it. I had to read it. He absolutely hates Starfleet. He cannot stand. He doesn't like the idea at all because his belief, if you read the comic, his belief is that it's going to be turned into a weapon, not a means of transportation. So he's very against Starfleet, and they fight with him for a long time to get him to come into Starfleet, just to get their hands on it. And eventually he gives in because they finally say to him, "No, we want it for propulsion, not for a weapon."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. Stamets reminds me a lot early on in the season of the character of David Marcus on in Wrath of Khan. And you there's a lot of similarities in that he's youthful and he's very passionate, and you can tell he has a passion for his science, but he's also very opinionated when it comes to Starfleet. And has a really kind of black and white opinion formed of the fact that Starfleet, regardless of what they project, is still a military organization and is still going to have a sort of military industrial type secret agenda, and is going to try to pervert the science to fit it into that agenda. And I from early on, one of the things I liked, and this is kind of funny. This is one of those things where I do come to the defense of the show, because a lot of times things happen on Discovery and about a lot of characters, including Stamets, and you would hear people say, well, that's not Star Trek at all. This kind of stuff never happened before, or these people never did that on Star Trek. And then if you think about it, and actually you don't have to think even that hard, you're like, actually, these things happen on Star Trek, and characters did speak like that and had those types of archetypes to them, and I feel like Stamets early on actually is very much reminiscent of David Marcus.
Nice connection.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection either until you said it, but it's actually a very good one. But it's not just that. I mean, look, we always think about TOS and all the TNG and everything else, and we think about it in the best possible light, right? Because that's like when people argue, "Oh, the bridge crew never argues, except always."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just. We believe one thing, but that's not always reality. Captain Kirk didn't run around having sex with green women all the time. It just didn't happen that much. The words were never uttered. Scotty, beam me up, never was said. These things never happened, but we believe them, so they become part of the story, so that when something new comes out, we just complain about our beliefs over the reality of what actually happened.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I mean, another good example of that, directly related to Stamets, is a lot of people complain when he was first introduced, and specifically in relation to Burnham, that he was a complete jerk to her in a way that a Starfleet officer would never be, because they're enlightened human beings, blah blah blah, and this goes against everything that Gene said and all this stuff. Meanwhile, I'm like, hello everyone, Commander Riker and Ro Laren.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
When Ro was first introduced, Riker was a huge jerk to her.
Yes, he was.
Exactly in the same way. And then, of course, then he ended up sleeping with her. But
you had to bring that up.
I did. Of course, I
hate that.
It's part of the story. But it's true. It's completely and utterly true that we just ignore those things because later on things happen that we like that character a lot. And if you're looking to find reasons to not like Stamets or the show in general, it's easy to point to them and say, "Oh, that never happened before."
Yeah.
Even if it has.
Yeah. And the way, when we're not, this isn't about Burnham, but like the way her interactions and the way she sort of ostracized, again, especially early in the series, and there was some backlash from fans about that, and again saying that it wasn't true to Star Trek, and my first thought at that point was like, well, I don't know, because I remember watching Voyager, and a lot of what they're showing is kind of what was going on with Tom Harris, and Harry Kim was sort of like Tom's equivalent of Tilly, because he was the one who never was like, you know what, I don't care what you did, I see only what I see you being now, and that's somebody that I want to be friends with.
Absolutely. That's great arguments for the show. And look, if that didn't happen early on, then the ending wouldn't matter, right? Her whole speech at the end doesn't matter if everyone was nice in the very beginning anyway.
Yeah.
But again, this is about Stamets. So to bring it back to Stamets, though, he was a jerk.
He was, yeah. He was.
He absolutely was. Like, because some people are like, well, he's not really a jerk. That's his personality. Yeah, but his personality is to be a jerk. And if you read the comic book, he was an even bigger jerk.
Yeah, and I would even go further and say, what proves that he is that you do see him change. And I think what I like about Stamets is that he reflects as a character. I don't know if it's the most, but definitely very clearly, I think the arc that the writers and producers wanted the show to take. And this idea of like, okay, we're not quite at the TOS, the Star Trek that we know, and we're going to get there. We're a little closer, let's say, to the Enterprise years, to current Earth years, or mentality image when we start, and we're going to get to the TOS era. And also the idea that to a degree within the microcosm of Discovery, there's been sort of a perversion of what Starfleet is and the Star Trek ideal by this guy who we're going to find out happened to not even be from our universe. And that when he's gone, we're going to see these crew members, these people start to emerge very quickly as much healthier kind of in the way that they operate as enlightened, Starfleet-like human beings and aliens. And I think that Stamets really kind of is written very well to show that arc. I think he starts out being more of somebody that we could imagine being at work today with us and being a jerk because he's in an environment, because the show is closer to kind of our world, and he's in an environment where those sort of like less desirable human traits are sort of brought out by the presence of Lorca. And as Burnham, because she's instrumental in that, helps them believe in themselves as Starfleet officers, you do see him change. And that sort of like, I think he's still got kind of a somewhat sarcastic, somewhat cynical side to him, but you do see him being much more elevated, I think, as a human being in terms of his compassion and his tolerance and his inclusion, the way he obviously relates and works with Burnham, the way he relates and works with Tilly. All of that seems to be kind of like more on par as you progress in the season with a quote-unquote typical Starfleet officer.
Amy, we really haven't gotten your initial thoughts.
Oh, well, he's written and he comes out as this jerk. But then, like has said, like his interactions, like how he deals with Tilly, and, he may start off to be dismissive, but every time he's listening to what everyone says, with Burnham and with Tilly and, and even with when we first see him with Culber, like, I'm like, well, there's nothing there, but then they're brushing teeth together, and it's like, oh my gosh, I would have never picked that up because I think he has a really good way of compartmentalizing. And so when he's at work, he's work, and I think that mycelial network sort of blends his brain and he meshes things more together. And so I think that helps, like you're saying, Nick, that the arc where he's able to relate in more compartments better with more people, and so gets to have the advantage of taking everyone's perspective and incorporating it into his philosophy of what Star Trek is and how he's going to contribute.
So I know comic books don't actually count, right? They're not canon, but we did bring.
I think it's different now, but
I think it is. I think
we'll leave that to the literary Trek shows.
Right. No, because unfortunately, it plays a big role in this episode because the comic book is specifically about Stamets before the show starts, right before, leading up to the show starting, and one in the comic book he personally asked for Tilly. That's his one demand, is if he's going to come on to Starfleet, he needs to have Tilly. They don't explain why, which is a little obnoxious because they don't explain why in the TV show either. But that was the one person he wanted, which is why it makes the beginning of the show and his reaction to her very confusing. Because he treats her so bad in the beginning. Right. If you remember, like she's like basically, he considered, way below him, but he demanded her, and apparently she doesn't know this. And it also shows how, and we'll get into this later, but it shows how the relationship with him and Culber come to be. And he was a real jerk to Culber But if you read the comic book, Culber was able to take it in stride and turn it on its side on him. So the play they have in the comic book is actually better than any scene they had in the show because of the way they back and forth each other in the comic book. But like I said, I know it's not technically canon, but they did bring I can't remember her name.
Oh, you mean that there's like
the author,
that there's a continuity between all.
Yeah, they brought a.
It's the author,
isn't it? Christian Byer?
Yes.
Yes.
Christian Byer. That's what it is. Sorry. So they brought her in specific. I should remember this. I actually watched her give her speech about this at Mission New York for the 50th anniversary. But Christian Byer. So they brought her in specifically to make sure these things all work. So while they're not technically canon, they're they're way closer than any previous books or anything we've ever had,
right?
To being canon than before. And I like it because it is giving us this kind of extra looks at other characters, you know. So for anyone who hasn't read it, though, Star Trek Annual is a must read in my opinion. If you even remotely like Stamets as a character, and I love Stamets as a character, so it was definitely worth the read.
Yeah, I feel like to me, there's if I use again the analogy of David Marcus, and within the two movies that we get him, right, you see, to me, David in The Search for Spock is much closer to Stamets in the second half of season 1 of Discovery, and David in Wrath of Khan is much closer to Stamets in the first half of season 1 of Discovery, and I think that what the parallel also extends to the point where, to a degree, even though they're not necessarily, they proceed under false assumptions, but the face that they think they see of Starfleet would actually validate their behavior, because even though he doesn't know, Stamets, that the Starfleet captain he's dealing with is not really a Starfleet captain, what he's seeing in his interactions with Lorca validates his personal feelings, his misconceptions that, oh, well, you know, these guys are just actually soldiers in disguise who want to use science for what soldiers always use it for, which is for war. And it's the same thing with David. You know, David basically sees the actions of the Reliant, who he doesn't know is being captained by somebody who's not a Starfleet captain, and he thinks, oh, they just want to steal Genesis and they just want to make it a weapon. And then as they both get more exposed to quote-unquote true Starfleet officers, they start to realize, oh, no, wait, the guys who really represent Starfleet really do put their money where their mouth is when they say that we're not about waging war, we're about science and exploration. And for David, it's obviously his own father. For Stamets, it's actually Michael Burnham. Like, I think she does a lot to really kind of help him turn around and see what Starfleet really represents in the fact that it's not baloney. And I don't know, maybe actually the fact that she does it even though she herself is facing adversity because she's alienated by Starfleet. They've ostracized her, and yet despite that, she still admires what it stands for. She still tries to be an ambassador for Starfleet. Maybe in a way that actually also kind of helps him come around her. Like, despite the fact that everyone in Starfleet hates her, she still advocates for Starfleet and what it stands for.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So good.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. So I don't even know where to go from there. No, okay. So I guess we should get on a topic too, which would be the Mycelial Network that I'm not sure. I don't remember if he found it or his partner found it, the one on the other ship, but they found it. But let's just say they both found it together, for argument's sake, and we're working on. So this network is going to allow them to jump great distances, right? So what do you think of this mechanic and how his interaction with it, Amy?
Well, it just seemed like a lot of technobabble. And I was like, what is going on? What are they talking about? The spore drive. And one of my favorite quotes, I'm just going to say it, says, at the quantum level, there is no difference between biology and physics. No difference at all. And you talk about spores. What are they? They are the progenitors of panspermia. They are the building blocks of energy across the universe. Physics and biology? No, physics as biology. I'm like, when I heard that, I was like, what the heck are they even talking about? All blah, 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 blah. But I like that, like, it's not physics and biology. You're combining them together, physics as biology, and like taking those two major sciences and putting them together and seeing how they interact and work together. Just really like that was one of the awesomest things that and so Star Trekky in my mind. That's like take something totally crazy and here it is, it's going to work. And this is a purpose for it and just total, make believe in the future. And it's like, gosh, it was so Star Trekky for me. I loved it. And it just was a bunch of technobabble in my ears, but I loved it.
So I honestly, it was absolutely technobabble, but I have no problem with that anymore. I've just given up on the idea of legitimate science in a lot of this stuff. Probably because I keep getting browbeaten every time someone mentions someone being out in space without a spacesuit and living through that experience. I keep losing that fight as to that can't happen. So if that can happen, why not run through, spores, run through, because they keep calling them spores, but obviously it would be the roots of the mushrooms that you were riding over, right? But why not that working and jumping me light years away in moments? So, yeah, I'm cool with it. I like it. I like the way he defends it, too. That's the thing. His reaction to it makes it worth more to me. And eventually we get to see him transverse it, which I was waiting for, and we finally see it as he comes out of the mirror universe.
Yeah, I think. The quote you pulled, Amy, is great, and it's a great example. You're right. Throughout the season, they definitely. They gave TNG a run for its money when it comes to technobabble on Discovery. They might have actually finally taken TNG down as the number one for technobabble because the one you pulled is actually great because that's one of the ones where there is like this very simple, because it's more like conceptual. So there's this very simple, almost philosophical logic to it where it doesn't really rest on science at all, but the idea makes sense. The concept, right? It's almost like it becomes more like a Zen thought than actual science. So you get it on this very basic level. Where it started to, like, for me, they almost lost me is when it got like later into the season. And yeah, they would have these scenes between Tilly and Stamets or Stamets and Saru, or, where you're like, what are you guys talking about? You are high on your mushrooms right now because you're not making any sense. There's building up to the finale. I think it's when it's the episode where they're making the plan to get back their universe, to leave the mirror universe. And there's that scene where I think it's predominantly Tilly and Stamets, and they're talking about their plan to we're gonna shoot the reactor of the mirror universe, ship of the Empress's ship, and then it's going to create this chain reaction, and we're going to use the spore drive, and we're going to create a wave, and we're going to ride the wave, and we're also going to use the warp drive, and and if we do the warp drive with the impulse and then the spores, and I'm like, whoa, you guys, you're just like, there's no way to follow. I don't understand like a single thing you're saying other than like you're saying words that are Star Trek words, but that's about it.
Yeah.
But that's cool because all I needed to know in that whole conversation was when they were done, we're going to be back in Prime Universe, right? Like that's all that we needed to know because all the other stuff was just was as far as I'm concerned, it was kind of junk. It was cool junk. It was junk I could try and explain one day, never have a real grasp of, but I knew that they were getting home, right? And we didn't do it that way anyway, so it doesn't matter. But
yeah.
It's one thing that TNG I think did better a lot of times. And to use your quote again, Amy, they did it well when in that scene, TNG would often, not always, because they sometimes fell in the trap too, but oftentimes they would find a simple analogy, right? Which actually drives scientists crazy because the moment you use it, they're like, no, it's not like that at all. But it makes sense. It's the whole concept of explaining a wormhole by saying, picture a sheet of paper. And if you fold a sheet of paper and you put a pen through it, that's how it works, right? Okay, well, even if a scientist is going to say, no, wormhole works nothing like that, you say that, and all of a sudden, a layman goes, okay, I totally get what you're talking about. It makes sense. Mm-hmm. And in that scene, they did it right. I think further on into the season, they tended to kind of get lost into the muck of their own technobabble and try to give you a lesson in Star Trek science. And it's like, dude, you might as well not try because It's not. It's just not real. It's fridge logic. So
it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so talking about that, I am going to bring in a little math. So listeners, if you need to fast forward a little bit, I'm going to go all math teachery. So in the research for Talking Stamets, they were talking about the spore drive and how at the beginning, with the USS Discovery and the Glenn, they were able to do intervals of sporine 12, and then they define that as a few hundred kilometers. And I'm like, oh, good, we're going to get, maybe we can figure out this ratio. And I'm, of course, thinking in my brain, how is this progression going to go? So they started with sporine 12. And I totally don't know if I'm saying it correct. It's a made up word. And then the USS Glenn was able, with the tardigrade, was able to do a sporine of 240, which was obviously much greater than 12. And they wanted to do a spore drive jump of a sporine 900, which Stamets felt was definitely unsafe. And we learned that in Context is for Kings. So I'm thinking, okay, so if I've got the 12 is a few hundred kilometers, what is 240 and what is 900? And it was very interesting. There's not another comparison to kilometers, so I can't really say. But I was wondering, is this going to be a linear or is this going to be exponential? Like 12 is to 2 kilometers and then 240 is to what? And then what does 900 represent? So I can't mathematically figure this out. But we do see the progression, obviously, that they started with 12 sporine and they were going to go to 900, which we are just going to have to assume is a very large amount, even though I can't put the math to it. And so I was a little disappointed.
It's kind of like Celsius and Fahrenheit, right? That's exponential. Yeah? Or is that?
Well, it could be.
No. What?
No, you double it and add something.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you double it and add 32. Yeah.
Exponential would be the Richter scale.
Right.
So 1 is 1, but 2 is 10 ones, and 3 is 10 twos, which are 10 ones to make 10 twos.
Yep.
Why is she laughing at us? That's how the Richter scale works. I don't know about anything else.
Don't move on, Patrick, because right now Amy is like trying really hard. She's trying really hard to not give us grief.
Well, she might as well, because we just confused everybody who's listening if that's wrong.
Go ahead, Amy. Go ahead. So,
and I'm not that familiar, but what you said about the Richter scale would not be, maybe. So
a level 1 earthquake, right?
Uh-huh.
The magnitude of a level 1 earthquake.
Yeah.
10 times that is a 2. But
okay.
Then you would need, so the next time you had, so if you had another, if the magnitude went up 10 times 1 again, it would be 2.1.
Oh, okay. Yes. Then that is exponential.
So far and so on. So by the time you got to like 8, I don't know. I can't do that math.
With base 10.
Right, okay. Right. You'd be way up the list on 8, where a 1 happens with a bus driving down the street,
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I was trying to think, I don't think it really would be linear. And then I was going quadratic. Exponential seems like to jump from 12 to 900. That's going to be amazing. So
if that was true,
I don't know.
Discovery could have got back in like 4 minutes. I mean, not Discovery, Voyager could have gotten back in like 4 minutes with that drive.
Yeah.
What we've learned from that is Kristen Beyer, if you're listening to this show and you want to have much better science dialogue in your show, hire Amy Nelson as your consultant. Period. End of sentence. Next.
So anyways, that was just me geeking out a little bit over the math behind it. But I liked, learning sort of the jumps and the numbers of sporines that they took. So I found it interesting.
It's cool, but they didn't give you enough. Like, they should have given us just enough to figure out some kind of stupid formula for it.
But see, that's the thing. I'm joking, but I'm not joking, because you said it, and like everything you said, that actually sounded like it made sense. I was like, oh, I'm listening to Star Trek science, and I'm actually following it.
Well, she does love her TNG.
And my math, so yes.
So that works out perfect. All right, so in this Mycelial Network, first we find that they're trying to make these jumps with no drive, right? I mean, Stamets talks about how it seems like the system is looking for something, and then miraculously Rip shows up. Or Ripper? They call him Ripper, right?
Yeah, Ripper.
Okay, so then miraculously Ripper's on the other ship and killed everybody. But so he finally finds his drive, but then realizes it's killing Ripper. That this whole process is actually killing Ripper. And this is when Stamets really starts to seem to have a heart, because he doesn't really like that it's killing Ripper.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
It seems like he would throw me in there and be okay with it.
Well, I mean, I think this is where you see kind of that arc we were talking about earlier, right? The fact that he, for him, it's not so much I hate Starfleet or it's that he's obviously you see that he's a compassionate person, and he does believe in a lot of ideals that I think Starfleet embraces, but you can see that there's basically been miscommunication, almost like in a bad relationship, where he has not been able. He's been in a situation where he hasn't seen that the precepts that he believes in are values that other Starfleet officers live by, and that's predominantly, we don't know at that point, but it's due to the sort of perversion or corruption of Lorca, who's made Discovery and its crew function differently. And I think this is the beginning of him being able to kind of through Burnham, he's able to come out and see that it's not just him being compassionate and embracing science, but also, embracing ethos and wanting to do the right thing and help other life forms, but that there are other Starfleet officers who believe the same thing. And in fact, that I think this is where he starts to realize, holy crap, like that's what Starfleet really is about. And most Starfleet people really kind of live by the same values. So I think that he kind of starts to, find more of a place, a voice to be himself and feel like being himself is not friction to being in Starfleet, being on a starship and doing his job. It feels to me like that.
I would agree. And I think that's shown in when he sacrifices himself for the tardigrade.
Yeah.
And when he takes the place of the tardigrade, I guess he doesn't really. Tardigrade kind of leaves, right? But whatever.
No, they set him free.
Oh, right, because he shrinks down and loses all his water, and that's when Culber looks at him and says he went into, I forget the exact terms he used, but basically hibernation, right?
Hibernation, yeah.
But hibernation that was going to kill him. I mean, it was kind of the implication there. Not like a normal hibernation for the species. Yeah. And then he lifts up, he leaves, and then poof, he's out in his own element again, being able to get back to the Mycelial Network on his own, and he leaves. And that's when, of course, Stamets does what you're not supposed to do at all, and he changes his own DNA so that he can now control this, because he's still so obsessed with the science of it that he's going to use himself to pilot the spore drive.
Right.
I just look at that, and I look at my life and I'm like, man, have I ever done something so crazy? He doesn't know what the DNA, how it's going to mix with him. I mean, there wasn't much time, I believe. I could be wrong. Maybe there was weeks, but even weeks of him studying the DNA of the tardigrade and thinking, oh, I'm going to inject it into myself. There's no time to run tests or to figure out what this is going to do to him. I mean, it totally could have killed him instantly with this DNA not meshing. And he goes and does it because he wants to, A, not kill the tardigrade, which is amazing, but B, because he wants to see his science project, be successful and reach its potential. I'm just like, man, that is some serious dedication and commitment to something like that. And I don't know that I would, if I've even done something similar in any way, shape, or form. That's a crazy leap for him to do that.
Well, I think, a self-sacrifice at that level where you put your life at risk in almost in a split second for someone else or for an animal. I don't think anyone really can plan ahead and say, this is what I know I would do, or I don't know that you're in that situation and all of a sudden you do it. And I think that in the Star Trek sense, it's definitely one of those moments, you know, it's self-sacrifice, and where you start to see him really embody what a Starfleet officer stands for. Whether he's doing that intentionally, because at that point, unlike Michael Burnham, I don't think he's trying. He's not trying to be a Starfleet officer. He doesn't care about doing that in the context of, well, because I want to prove that I'm a Starfleet officer. But I think that, and again, this is what perhaps in hindsight, after the fact, he starts to realize that who he is aligns itself, or can align itself, with what Starfleet stands for, because he realizes that what he did actually is received by others in a way that shows him that, well, they would have done the same, or they're the same. They believe in the same values. But I think that, like Patrick said, you know, it's the kind of I don't even know if it comes out of like the mad scientist as much as it's an instant, like he's so against the idea of Lorca using and potentially killing this thing for the benefit of doing what he needs to do, that he's willing to just put his life at risk and die, if that is what's going to happen, just so that creature that has no say in its own fate doesn't suffer the same fate, right? And I mean, it's like I said, you know, I saw a video not long ago of this guy, and it's actually, it just went viral recently, but it happened a long time ago in the 90s, there was a chimp that fell in the zoo in a moat and was drowning, because chimps can't swim. And this guy didn't think a second. He was a visitor at the zoo. He jumped in the moat against the advice of the zookeepers who were there and were telling him not to go, because chimps also are very aggressive. And he just instantly went and swam, and then just grabbed the chimp and then helped the chimp climb back, right? And it's kind of the same thing. It's like that guy, you know, could have totally been killed in an instant, intentionally or not. But he didn't think. And it's one of those moments where I think your compassion just drives you over reasoning or logic. You just kind of do what you feel is right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd like to make a point on something you just said, that he finds that his ideals are starting to align with other Starfleet members. But I think at this point, you know, Starfleet is still relatively new, right? I mean, we're 100 years from Enterprise, and Starfleet starts up 10 years or so after Enterprise, something like that, right? So we're like 90 years in, but that's still relatively young for an organization as a whole. And I think he sees that he can kind of help guide Starfleet into what it can be. Like, because he has these other people around him, that he still, I think, believes that Starfleet is what Lorca is at this point. But that if he has enough people that think like him and act like him, that Starfleet can actually move in a direction that he more respects than what Lorca is.
I mean, I think Starfleet already exists, obviously, when Enterprise starts. And this is like about a century later. So they're like, you know, I don't know, like 100, 150 or 140 years. But there's still a lot of like figuring out. And of course, the characters from Enterprise are very seminal in kind of informing what Starfleet is going to be about. I think at the stage of Enterprise, they don't know at all what Starfleet is about. They kind of go in the whole arc of Enterprise is themselves figuring out what is a Starfleet captain, what does a Starfleet ship do. And then at that point, I think at the point of Discovery, there's already more of an idea. They're formed as an organization. They're more fully fleshed out, but there's still a lot of like the templates aren't really kind of gelled. And I think you're right. A lot of the characters who are from that era are going to be kind of probably what goes down, what forms sort of the Hall of Fame of the role models for what Starfleet should be and how officers should behave in this and that situation.
Yeah, I wanted to just maybe tiny disagree with just something that you said, Patrick. Like, I don't think that Stamets is doing this because he thinks that he's going to change Starfleet or help them mold. I think it's more of that he's going to end up, because of his actions, just in general, like that natural consequence of, oh, here's an ideal, and we want to follow that. So, I don't think he was in his mind saying, well, I want to help Starfleet transition into this type of compassion or self-sacrifice for science type of thing. I think, you know what I'm saying?
I do, but so maybe, but I think that there's a part of him that in his head thinks, if I finally agreed to come here, he's a control freak. He is. I mean, it shows it. And I think he wants to have a lasting effect on the way they do things moving forward. Because he doesn't want them to take his experiment and make it into a weapon. He wants to teach them to be explorers, scientists, stuff like that. He wants to impart that, I think, to some degree, impart that on them so they don't want to be a warlike race, which is what he believes in the beginning. He believes they're a military organization that's running around the galaxy shooting at people. Like that's his original belief. Like, he thought they're going to make a weapon out of this. In all the technobabble they gave us, there's no real way to make a weapon out of it. It's just a way to make other weapons better because of it. But that's true of any technology, right? I mean, any technology you can think of can somehow affect weapons, and almost everything was designed by the military. So eventually the money got so big he had to say yes. That's how the comic book gives it. But so I think he felt at this point now, not in the very beginning, but to the point we're at now, that if he could leave anything behind of himself, that it would to be that these are the things I'd want to continue in Starfleet, not the weapons and the war and the fighting. And I could be totally wrong.
I think I see both of your point of views. I think in the big picture, I would agree with you. I think that at this point, it's almost like I would say he almost sees himself maybe a little bit as a fifth column agent also, where he's like, okay, there's this science and they're going to use it no matter what. And if I'm not here, if I say, well, I refuse to be part of this because it's morally wrong, they're going to bring in someone else who might be ethically less conscientious than me, and things might even be worse. So I'm going to stay, and I'm going to make sure that I stay as a force that kind of countermands any attempt to pervert this into something unethical, immoral, etc. That way, even though I don't want to be part of it, from inside I can do more good than if I'm on the outside. And I think in the big picture, I do see that kind of that idea that he's not necessarily trying to change Starfleet or anything, but he's like, okay, well, if I stay, I'm going to try to make sure that the least wrong is done with this effort, with this science, with this philosophy. But I think that where I think Amy is right is when he acts, especially when we talk about the tardigrade, that impulse he has in the moment, not the big picture thinking. Those actions, he's not thinking in terms of being a role model for Starfleet or as a Starfleet officer, or because he cares about Starfleet, or in the future what other Starfleet cadets or science officers or whatnot are going to look back. I think it's just, if anything, at that point he's still thinking, well, shoot, those people are all jerks and they're going to use this thing and they're probably going to kill it. And this is not who I am. I'm going to step in, and even if it kills me, I'm going to make sure that this thing doesn't get hurt. And then after the fact, he starts to realize from the response of others around him, oh, so there are people like Starfleet actually believes in some of those ideas that I have. They're not all like Lorca. They're not all saying, oh, we got to do whatever it takes. The ends justify the means. And at that point, I think, is when he starts to find more of a place and a voice within the crew and as a Starfleet officer. And that, I think, kind of is it seems to me like what Amy was describing.
Right. So, but we see that too when he volunteers to do the 133 jumps, right?
Right.
Because we talked about this when we went over Lorca, but we can actually touch on it again with Stamets. Is Lorca plays him to get him to do this? Lorca is basically like, I'm not going to ask you. No, I would never ask you to safely get us home. And so Stamets just volunteers to do it, and Lorca's not going to stop him at that point, right? And this is another selfless act he's doing because he doesn't want to put the rest of his crew at risk. And it basically gets him killed for a moment, right? I mean, he gets trapped in the Mycelial Network, which is really, at the moment, it could have been his death as far as we knew. We didn't know if he was ever going to get out or what was going to happen. Yeah,
absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I think at that point, I I think the Stamets of a few weeks before or a few months before probably would not have volunteered. And the irony is that I think that he's allowing himself to be kinder and more compassionate and more selfless because he's starting to see that he has a place that Starfleet can be in, and a starship in Starfleet can be in line with who he is, what he believes in. And so he starts to act like someone who wants to be part of the family. And that's what Lorca takes advantage of.
Right.
And in that moment, Lorca totally acts like the kinder, compassionate Starfleet captain. And so plays on that and goes, oh, well, yeah, we are one big happy family, and I'm Papa Smurf. So I love all my people.
Yeah. And we're doing all this for science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Because he had that map with all those points and that he just filled out, which, again, another point where he plays Stamets is he shows them that, and I just have a few gaps to fill. He knew Stamets was going to go after it.
Right.
He knew it.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Mycelial Network, and this is, I guess, a small tangent because it's indirectly related to Stamets since it's the drive, but I don't know. We don't have to necessarily get into it too much because this is, I think, the unreconcilable science of Discovery. But so there's that, when Lorca first shows Burnham the idea of the spore drive, and he has her. I'm not completely sure what happens because it's in that chamber, he has her basically travel to all these different places. Right. And there's something that we never saw again on the show. And I wasn't understanding. I was like, okay, how is she in the chamber moving? It's like she's going to these places, but the ship isn't. In what way is she now interacting with the spores that allows her to do this?
So in my head, I retcon this because it's ridiculous. That when in the chamber, the spores were acting more like a hologram, and they were bringing the images to her, not her going to the images.
So in my head, because yes, you're trying to resolve these discontinuities. So I was thinking that in that chamber, I guess a telephone booth, Doctor Who, that chamber, she was going there, just moving through, but just that one certain. So I figured it's pretty easy to move one person through the network, but not an entire ship. So in my mind, it was size matters.
You're saying, so it's something like Lorca says, oh, with this spore drive, you could even, for example, go see the Romulan Senate. And then, so she hears that, she thinks it, and the spores are in the booth with her and can kind of feel or read her mind or whatever. And then they transport her to the place that she's thinking of. Yeah, is that how we were saying that this works?
Well, okay, so that's the way Amy's saying
That's what, yeah.
My version was just a little different, that they were bringing the images to her, that she was never actually leaving the ship.
Oh.
So it was like being in a holographic chamber, like going to the holodeck.
So they're just showing her an image of...
Right, but it does make more sense what Amy says, because they do actually make reference to moving a ship of that size.
Right.
When talking about jumping.
Well, because I was going to say, if this is the basic concept, then wouldn't the way to do it is, rather than have this complex drive, is just flood the entire ship with spores and tell the whole crew, think very hard where you want to go.
Oh, yeah, create this field and create its own little chamber.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you would say, okay, you would have a chamber with spores, and you would tell the person who can communicate with them, okay, go in there and then think. I mean, I guess to a certain degree, that's what Stamets does. But it seems like his interaction, and this is where, that's Discovery science for you, his way, his method to do it is much more complicated than the way that they show Burnham do it, which is very simple plot device. You're in the room, spores are in the room, you think about the place, you're in the place.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you extrapolate that, right, you couldn't just flood the ship with spores, because think of how many spores there are in relation to the size of her body. You'd have to surround the ship.
Yeah, you'd have to make it its own container. I mean, yeah, it'd be large, but you're force fields and flood it with.
Yeah, you'd have to flood out into space. If you think how big is the room compared, Oh, now we're really getting into math. Volumes of rooms. And,
well, plus,
Yes.
but we have another Star Trek, Discovery leap of science, which is after we're being told this resource is extremely difficult to grow and extremely rare and extremely this, then in the space of 5 minutes, they go to a moon and they grow like an entire forest worth of it. It's impossible to have it until you need it, and then you can have an unlimited amount of it.
I gave up on that whole part of the science. I did, because twice they did that, right?
Yeah.
They told us they used the very last of it ever in existence.
Yeah, exactly.
So, where did you get the seeds?
Oh, I forgot those in my sock. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Okay, I'm ignoring that. So, well, whatever. But okay, so now we meet Mira Stamets. What I was trying to get to was after the 133 jumps and then the one extra jump to go home that lands us in the mirror universe, we meet. Well, actually, a couple of things happen, but we meet Mira Stamets at this point, right? Running around the Mycelial Network. Mm-hmm. So basically, he got sucked into the Mycelial Network. He's stuck there forever, and this is when we learn. We don't learn that it's dying just yet. Oh, we do, right?
Yeah, throughout the episode, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they have a little interaction, but we find out that the Mycelial Network is basically dead and gone forever.
Right.
Well, that it's dying.
I mean, you're right. It is gradual because at first, I guess, I don't know if he knows and he's lying or if he doesn't know and he's misinterpreting, but Mira Stamets tells the Prime Universe Stamets that basically, he sees almost the Mycelial Network as dangerous, like a monster, right? And he's trying to warn Prime Universe Stamets against it. And it's Prime Universe Stamets, if I remember correctly, who figures out, no, it's not that it's dangerous, is that you are basically creating the danger by using it the way you are, and you're killing it.
I kind of touched on it earlier, but that's how every bit of technology ever has existed, right? I mean, we have nuclear bombs that could level whole countries or power cities forever. Mm-hmm. It's the same technology. Mm-hmm. It's all in how you use it and how it's regulated and whatever else you want to put on that. But so, and this is, if I was in the mirror universe, I would think it's a horrible thing because it literally powers the center of a ship that's going around killing everything it can find that's not a human or a Terran.
So I wanted to ask you guys, seeing Mira Stamets, it was almost like I wasn't seeing Mira Stamets as opposed to seeing other mirror counterparts, because it didn't seem like Mira Stamets was... he was a little conniving, I guess, by what you're saying. It's the biggest thing he did was lie to him about the Mycelial Network, that it was dangerous and, don't go there. But maybe I'm just not interpreting Mira Stamets correctly, but it sort of felt like he was, the only bad thing he was doing was trying to make Prime Stamets stay in the network, because he was like, no, don't follow, go this way. And Prime was like, no, I need to go over here. I need to get, I can't remember, I don't know. I need to go somewhere. And Mira Stamets was like, no, go this way. And it's is this the worst that Mira Stamets is doing, is just lying to him and trying to keep him in the Mycelial Network?
I think that's actually something I'll preface what I'm going to say by saying I've never been a big fan of the Mirror Universe. The only Mirror Universe episode that I really, really like in Star Trek is the original one, Mirror. And I think it works because it was intended as a one-trick pony. I don't think they ever thought of it as it's going to be its own universe with its own backstory and continuing story. And so for the moral of that story, it works. It proves its point. But I don't think it's something that really supports kind of an ongoing meanwhile in the Mirror Universe plot. And for one of the main reasons being that the concept of these kind of really cartoony evil twin concepts, it works if you do kind of a Twilight Zone episode, flip the mirror literally and say, okay, what if? But it's kind of silly to imagine a universe where everyone is the exact opposite, and yet the universe is almost identical in so many ways. If everyone was the exact opposite, well, they wouldn't have the exact same ships. They wouldn't have, that things would be. It's kind of conveniently the same where it wants to be, and conveniently a direct 180 where it wants to be. And I think, to me, a lot of times this is what kind of hurts the mirror universe. But what I think Discovery did better in most cases, especially, and I think that it's probably the writing and the talent of the actors, the lead cast, when they play their mirror selves, including Stamets and Lorca, Georgiou, they play it in a way which kind of brings out, I think they're faithful to the old Star Trek idea of the mirror universe, but you can actually see how this person is not just kind of a cartoony opposite version of the one from the Prime universe. They are a real person, and you can see how they share similarities, right? It's more like some traits that are kind of more pronounced, but it's still, you can see how that is a parallel version of the person we know. And I think it's the same thing with Stamets. Like, I think they also talk about how there's a mention to the fact that he betrayed Lorca in the mirror universe, the mirror version of Stamets. And I think that they do mention that he was specifically trying to use the Mycelial Network as a weapon. So that would kind of be in line with him being a mirror universe character. But you're right. He does play him in a much, much more kind of even. He's not so theatrical about it. He's more like a real person. So
to add to that, though, I completely agree. And I love that. I actually do like the Mirror Universe episodes, but you have to take them for what they are. They're not. None of them before now were really that serious, and you have to just accept that and suspend disbelief. But what this has done, what the episodes in Discovery have done, is they've brought it back to the fact that you can actually now take this and explain away some of the things that other Mirror Universe characters have done, because they do show you that the Mirror Universe isn't a full 180 difference from the regular universe like it was originally intended, but that this is this person with very similar or identical traits and very similar or identical actions, just turned just enough to be evil. And what would happen if that was the case? So every action could have a positive or a negative outcome it's looking for. And the way I took it was that it was everyone went towards the negative side, but that's not a full 180 like the original series made it and how all the other ones did. This is more, to me, like you said, it's just more realistic. And it kind of, now you can look back and say, oh, well, in the Enterprise of Mirror Darkly, this happened because this, and this. Or in whatever, any other episodes from Mirror Universe, you can kind of explain away some of the things by using what Discovery's interpretation of the Mirror Universe is.
Yeah, you're right, Patrick. That's a really good argument. That actually, it's to use your nuclear analogy. I mean, I think that you could apply it to the characters also, to human characters in the Prime Universe and Mirror Universe, where it's sort of saying, okay, well, the raw material is neither good or evil. It's what you do with it. And then a slight twist of fate can influence the way you look at that raw material. And someone might then say, oh, we should use it to blow up a city. And someone else might say we should use it to power a city.
Right. And now with Stamets and Stamets, Mirror Stamets and regular Stamets, you have that going head to head with a guy who kind of is a jerk in the regular universe, so you expect him to be a bigger jerk in the Mirror Universe, but that's not necessarily true. They're just both jerks, and one used it to create a weapon, so he's deadly afraid of it. The other one used it for propulsion, and he wants to continue to bring it out, and that makes perfect sense to me. That's exactly the reactions I would expect from that character. Because it really seems like Mirror Universe now is more, they took a character and just dropped him into this bad universe. And how did that exact character react in the optimistic universe and the non-optimistic universe?
Yeah. Yep.
Now, we also, in the Mirror Universe, when he's stuck, he also sees Culber. Because of his connection to Culber, and this bothers me because he wouldn't know Culber was dead, right? This shouldn't have happened this way.
You mean the Prime Universe Culber?
Right. Prime Universe Culber comes to him when he's stuck in the Mycelial Network.
Right. And that's how he figures out that Culber is dead, because he sees him in there.
Which doesn't make sense.
Right. It's another one.
Because Culber would have no reason to be in there. and he would know So we talked about this on a previous episode where we talked about that he must have created Culber, like he created the ship. But that really doesn't make sense either, because he wouldn't know he was dead enough to make him.
Right.
He doesn't have to be dead for him to recreate him.
But he realizes he's dead because he recreated him.
Well, so that point, but
right. If he just saw him, it's his partner,
Yeah.
so of course. But he realizes that Culber's dead because he's there.
Yeah, I mean, but Patrick's right. Like, you know, they're kind of this one of those things where they're cheating. They're cheating because we know that he's dead, and so they're having the character make a leap, which we can kind of believe, or you know, fill in the blanks because we know that to be true. But if you think about it, there's nothing about the Mycelial Network which just, I mean, unless Stamets believed himself to be dead, and so saw Culber, and then could then logically conclude, well, if I'm dead in here and you're in here, therefore you must be dead also. But other than that, there's no real reason for him to believe that just because he sees Culber in the Mycelial Network, that means he's dead.
right.
Yeah, it just drives me. It also cheapens the point, in my opinion, which is really what I was trying to get with this. Very labored movement to get here, but if you love somebody and you thought you were dying, that should be the last person you see. Not because you think they're dead do you see them, but because that's the last vision you would want to have on your way out, right? Mm-hmm. I would think so. Mm-hmm. But they kind of cheapened it by having him think Culber was dead. But anyway, it's a long way to get back to the fact that they had a very strong relationship, and I think they cheapened it at the end there, but what did you think, Nick, of the relationship with Culber itself?
I thought it was great. I mean, I thought as Star Trek romances go, in love, and especially in long-term relationships, it sometimes was not one of Star Trek's forte, in generally speaking. I'm thinking of like the characters who had long-term relations, and it wasn't necessarily bad, but I think a lot of times Star Trek would kind of default on sort of very kind of stereotypical or corny, not necessarily bad, again, good sometimes, but still kind of two-dimensional representation of what that is. And in this case, I thought that it was the exact opposite. I thought that it was, you really believed that these were two people who were passionately in love, but you also really believed that these were two people who were a real couple. You know, they weren't, like, for example, Amy's going to hate me in a minute, but
Nick,
better you than me.
Walk carefully.
Yes, I am. I'm choosing my words very carefully right now. So Troy and Riker. You know,
I knew we were going there. You had to go there when you talk about long-term relationships.
Okay, so first, they're not a bad relationship, and you know, I believe them as a couple. But if you, I'll say this, like, I see them. I totally believe them as a couple in terms of like a summer romance, right? But I don't see really the anxiety part of their relationship. I don't see real soulmates in there. I don't see people who could be brushing their teeth together. You know, and that doesn't mean that, you know, it was badly written. I think they just didn't write for that, and so I felt like I was almost more like always seeing, kind of in a cool way, but kind of the corny sort of, you know, romance novel aspect of what their love would be. And not like what love becomes when it deepens over time between people who are real partners, you know, life partners, soulmates, et cetera, through everything that daily life throws at you. Same thing with Miles and Keiko. You know, I mean, like, way worse, because Riker and Troy, you believe that these are two people who are in love. But to me, I never felt like, okay, these are people who have loved each other now for years. With Miles and Keiko, I always wondered throughout the entire series, what are these two people doing together? Because to me, it seems like they almost hate each other. You know, they annoy one another constantly. And maybe for some couples, maybe that's a dynamic of how they function. But
well, it was a plot for Data's Day. I mean, that's why they're together.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And then in Voyager, I mean, I think they were definitely headed in the right direction. And I'm not a huge Voyager fan. I think with Tom and B'Elanna, they were kind of headed there, and they did build more of like, they're not one way or another way, but there were times where it was a little corny, a little kind of cardboardy. With Culber and Stamets, I never felt that. I really believed 100% that these are people who are in love and who love each other, who have lived together through the romantic moments of life, but also through just everyday life.
So, to add to that, I would say, again, to anyone who hasn't read the comic book, read it, because there's actually 2 great scenes in that comic book about this, where they first meet, and where Stamets first finds out Culber is part of Starfleet, which annoys him, and then they talk, and he starts calling him to go over data and stuff. He asked Culber to look over things, and he didn't need Culber's help. He was just trying to flirt with him the whole time. And even in those moments, he's being a jerk to Culber for being in Starfleet. And it's great because Culber just knows how to take it and give it back to him. You know, so they're not really personal attacks, but it's clear that the fact that he's in Starfleet annoys Stamets to a degree. And Culber knows how to handle him. And they're awesome scenes that should have been on screen, but they weren't. And then everything else you say, I absolutely agree with. I mean, the progression of their relationship from start to finish was great. Like I said, the only thing that bothered me was the ending was cheapened by him jumping to, "Oh, you must be dead."
Yeah, I mean, I see what you mean. I felt like what you described is implied in the show, but never shown. You get the sense, like, you never really see it happen on screen. You get the sense that part of what Culber likes about Stamets is the fact that he almost has his shields on all the time, and he's going to act like a jerk as a way to say, well, if you the kind me, the compassionate me, and Culber's like, yeah, I know you for who you really are, and you get the feeling that what Stamets likes about Culber is the fact that he's a guy who's like, well, I put my shields up like I do for everyone, but where 9 people out of 10 in the room are going to say, oh, what a jerk. This guy actually, I don't fool him for 1 second. He sees me for who I really am. He knows and gets the fact that this is almost an act to defend myself, you know, and that in that the real me is he sees that. He sees right away, like, the more compassionate, more open, you know, guy who has a sense of humor, who can be tender, et cetera, et cetera. But like you said, I feel like instead of actually directly showing us that at play, they're kind of implying that it's this dynamic, and you can kind of infer, but it would have been nice if there were a few scenes where you really saw and you really got then, oh, well, this is how these guys fell in love, because they instantly, it clicked. It worked for them. Like one saw right through the other, and the other was impressed by the fact that the one saw right through him.
Right, because if you just look at the two, the way they act, the both of them act, you would think that you could possibly think that Culber was the one impressed with Stamets because he's strong-willed and he has convictions on what should be done with his experiments and this, but really it was the other way around.
Right,
It was that Culber saw through that, and Stamets respected Culber because he was able to see through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I were to reword what you were saying, really, but
yeah.
So to go back, since I do need to comment on the Riker Troy thing.
Sorry, man, I tried to jump in there and save you.
I thought I was out of the woods.
I thought if I talked long enough,
I noticed how you went to Miles and Keiko, and I was like, didn't even give me a chance to respond. I'm like, oh,
yeah, I was trying to move. I was like, okay, and now I'm leaving TNG behind. Save yourself, Patrick. Save yourself.
I'm out of here, jettison.
So listen, I don't think it's a fair comparison to look at Stamets and Culber in relationship to Troy and Riker, because their relationship was not they weren't together in any way that we really saw. And the fact that you didn't see their love doesn't mean that it didn't exist, because I see their love and I think it's a beautiful relationship. Now, other thing. That is the correct response.
Emperor Amy.
Emperor Amy is here now. But one thing that sort of taints is a negative word, but how, I guess, a rose-colored glasses. Like, I read the book Imzadi and Imzadi 2. And so even though I know that's not canon, but like that does play into my mind when I see Troy and Riker. And it's unconscious because I've read it so long ago. That's how I know them. And so that's how I see them. But I don't think it's a fair comparison because they're off being, friends during the series. And then all of a sudden they end up being married, which I totally get. And I love them together. But what you're saying, like with Keiko and Miles and Tom and B'Elanna, like those two couples were meant to be together, like Culber and Stamets. So I think making a comparison between those couples is definitely warranted. And I do agree with you, even though I am in my Deep Space Nine watch, like I'm seeing Miles and Keiko together, and I'm now seeing like what people are saying. It's like, yeah, I don't see them why are they together? I don't know. I think some of it might have to do with the actual actor's chemistry. Like I totally believe Miles as the chief engineer on the station and can fix anything. And I believe his relationship with Bashir and so I'm wondering if it's just the chemistry that the actors have with each other. Tom and B'Elanna, I see their chemistry is really strong. And I get that everyday feel with them like I do with Culber and Stamets. And I think the acting with Culber and Stamets is totally on point. Like there is definite chemistry that I see between them. And so kudos to them for bringing that to this relationship that makes it more authentic, more real than we've seen in any previous iteration of Star Trek.
All right, hold my beer. I'm going to piss somebody off right now. So as far as I have to defend Miles and Keiko because I actually like both of them. Maybe not together, but I think that was the point. I think they were written in a time where marriages were seeming to be more independent of each other. Two partners were seeming to be a little bit more independent of each other, where the husband and the wife relied on each other a lot, especially way back, and then as time went on, they kind of became slightly more independent. And now, I don't know, everyone I know that's married is heavily reliant on each other. But I think they were written to seem independent, and it went horribly awry because it seemed like society was going that way, even though it never really did. I'm sure someone's screaming right now at their iPhone. Or
no, I can see that.
Yeah, I can see it. I mean, I think, and I'll give you. I mean, I think that was probably the intent to capitalize on Amy's point. I think that where I would sort of, and I wouldn't. It could be partly chemistry between the actors. I think it was in the writing, and I think to kind of make my argument. I mean, we're going on a tangent here, but I would say it's almost like if you think about Wesley, I think where I'm an apologist a lot of time for Wesley. It comes from the fact that I understand where they were coming from and what they wanted to do with the character of Wesley Crusher. But I also, and so for that, I don't mind Wesley as much as a lot of other people do, because I can tell what they were trying to do. But I also will agree, I can see that even though they were, I can tell what they were aiming for. The way they were doing it a lot of times was very clumsy, and especially in the writing. It wasn't so much that Will Wheaton wasn't a good actor, that he couldn't do it, is that they were writing, it was almost like an 80-year-old man writing what he thinks, the way he thinks a 17-year-old boy would speak, and how they would think or how they would act. So there was something very kind of off to the side. And I feel like with Keiko and O'Brien, I'll give you that. Like, I think that the intent was there to kind of show almost like, I guess, a liberated modern couple, not being in traditional roles, but being more probably in their mind equal. And so their idea was probably starting as like, well, we're going to write them as like, they don't just say go left and the other person says, okay. They kind of talk about it and they go, well, sometimes one wants to go left, someone wants to go right. And sometimes they don't reconcile. They just go, okay, well, we'll figure out a way for me to go left and you to go right. And that's how they make it work. But in the way it was written, and then probably the way it was directed or acted, it then came across like something was lost a lot and came across as like, just off to me, where I was like, now it sounds like you're just two people who are getting on each other's nerves constantly. Whereas with Stamets and Culber, I was like, yeah, you can see how you're very different people, but you can also believe how that is actually what drew you together and how you love each other for that.
Well, yeah, so to bring this back, I think that the way they wrote Stamets and Culber is exactly how they should have written Miles and Keiko. I think that was the intention. Because they are two very independent people who are very reliant on each other, opposed to just being independent people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I can be independent and still be relying on my wife. It doesn't... I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it's not in a marriage.
No, I totally agree. I mean, that's what true love, I think, is when you realize that relying on your partner is not binding, but actually liberating. And one, you know, being yourself does not come at the cost of relying on your partner, and vice versa.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think they finally got it right with Stamets and Culber.
Yep. And I would definitely credit, in this case, you know, it's the opposite. I would say it's definitely a huge kudos to the writers and huge kudos to the actors. They both, you know, they wrote it perfectly and they acted it perfectly.
So, Nick, do you have any final thoughts on Stamets?
You know, I would say that, I mean, I think several characters on the crew of Discovery represent very well what Star Trek is about. What I really liked about Stamets is that I love the arc that they gave him and how it reflected what the producer said from early on, from before the show even aired, they wanted to do with this particular Star Trek series. They said, we want to show how we go from point A to point B, how we come from something that is closer to Enterprise, to modern day Earth, to something that is closer to Gene Roddenberry's vision of Star Trek in the original series. And Stamets really embodies that very well in the way that they wrote the character, and the way that the actor played that arc, and sort of in nuances evolved from the very first episode we saw him in to the end of the season. I felt like that was a very true representation of what they were trying to do. So that's kind of what I like the most about it.
Awesome. Amy, your final thoughts?
Yeah, in studying and doing the research for the show, just seriously impressed with his character and his commitment and dedication, obviously, to his spore drive project, and in his relationship with Culber. Just, and I don't think that he's out to say, "Ooh, look at me," but is just so dedicated and focused that he's going to take any leap possible to make it work, and to realize his vision that he has for it. I think, Nick, you're right. And we do see that arc of, through his relationship, like how people and therefore Starfleet is changing from this rough and, rough exterior to, oh, this is our philosophy. This is our vision. This is who we want to be, and bringing those ideals actually into play. And this is how we can use them in our real life. I think Stamets does a great job. And when we see that arc through the first season, it's spot on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. My final thoughts on Stamets are pretty simple. I love the fact that he is exactly the way he is, and he's perfect for the kind of scientist that would demand this to be used for propulsion and not for a weapon, because that could have went horribly wrong really quickly. I like that we see that his defense mechanism is to be very arrogant, and he has some reason to be arrogant. He is extremely smart and in the top of his field, but at the same time, he's really not as arrogant in his own head as he's letting out to the rest of the world, which lends to a little bit of vulnerability, which is nice. And I like the fact that he really invents the technobabble that carries on through Starfleet forever after this.
That's right.
So that's about all my final thoughts. But thanks, Nick, for joining us on this deep dive of Stamets. Pleasure having you on. Where can people find you on the interwebs to continue this discussion? Oh,
it's my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me on. I feel really lucky to be part of the conversation. If people want to chat, the best place to find me is in the Babel Conference, Trek.fm's discussion group on Facebook. I am there very regularly, almost on a daily basis. So they can find me there easily. If not, they can look me up on Facebook under my own name. And that's kind of my only social media presence. I'm not on Twitter, and I'm not a big social media guy. So those are probably the two best places.
Great. Again, thank you so much. I love having you on and like your connections. And I always really learned so much, actually. And I look forward for when season 2 comes out. We did a lot of texting after each new episode. Yes. Nick, what'd you think of this? Yeah. What'd you think of this? And it was good. So hope that will continue next season.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I miss we would like sometimes call each other and be like, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, this is like going back to the old school days of watching TV, which is one thing I loved about Discovery being, on a weekly basis as opposed to just dropping, is that we could have these conversations right after and be like, oh my God, do you believe what just happened?
I couldn't agree more. I'm so glad that they decided to drop this like a regular TV show on a network, and that they didn't just like do what Marvel is doing on. Not that that's the worst thing either, because binge watching is a thing too, but there's something about Star Trek that shouldn't be binge watched the first time, in my opinion.
I agree.
When you get that week to let it marinate and to think about it, and for us to podcast about it.
Yeah, well, there's no live if we had to do the whole show, right? I mean, Randy and Bruce would have to do the whole series in one night.
And Star Trek is a morality play, right? So, I mean, you're already kind of decreasing a little bit the potential or the ability to do that by having a highly serialized arc instead of sort of weekly morality plays. So if you drop it literally as one 14 or 15 hour story, 15 hour movie at once, then you're kind of like, it's basically becomes more of a giant movie than a series.
Yep, absolutely agree. But it's been fun talking about Paul Stamets today, but this isn't the only thing we've been discussing on the network. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek.fm.
Previously on Trek.fm. The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
I thought it was really funny. Not funny, but sort of weird. A good contrast that she was actually eaten by Klingons, and then later the Emperor in the Mirror Universe is shown eating a Kelpian. I was just saying, either side of either universes, the species are munching on each other.
Oh, dear.
One way.
Oh, my gosh.
Warp 5.
So we would have cool firefights at this point. We could bang, pew, pew, stuff like that.
Yes. Well, you can only do so much in a hallway, dude.
What?
I said you can only do so much in a hallway. Maybe I don't know. Maybe in the mess hall. There you go.
Have you seen Star Trek? They're always hiding behind some like bulkhead that's just randomly placed in a hallway.
This is true.
They're all over the place.
Earl Grey.
So she's trying to balance this and she's playing along, but she gets to that point where it's like, and I love that scene as well. It's like, now is the time to listen to me. We've tried to do it your way. It hasn't worked. I'm ordering you to do that or I'll eject you into space. And we know how Troy is. Like, she's the last person you'd think who would eject someone into space.
Yes. Or even threaten that.
But because she's gotten to this point and is in this perilous situation, I believe that she might actually do it,
Melodic Treks.
But the interesting thing about this episode's score, it was composed by Fred Steiner, who did a lot of episodes for the original Star Trek, but this episode did not have a complete score. In fact, there's only about 10 minutes of music that were actually recorded for this episode, and the rest of it was library material. So we're going to focus today on the music that was recorded specifically for this episode, and some of the fun music that entails.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all of these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review.
If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. Best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. Now, If you'd like to send us an email, and we love getting your emails, you can use the form on our website at Trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select The Edge. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at Trek.fm and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. So, Patrick, where can people find you when you're not brushing your teeth with your partner?
Well, when I'm not doing that, I can be found on the Babel Conference. I pop my head in there once in a while. Sometimes I'm still brushing my teeth when I do that because it's more text-based.
If you're a little mumbled and you're texting.
It's okay. But I do pop up in there because I'm very busy, so I have to brush my teeth while doing that. You can also find me on Twitter at MagicDrop5, or you can find me with my buddies, Brandon, who's actually taking a little bit of a break now, but he'll be back, and Brandy over at Warp 5, dropping every Friday. So anyway, where can people find you when you're not talking to the mirror universe of yourself in a fake ship you made up in your head?
Well, you can find me here on the network. I host Earl Grey with Richard and Justin, and that's our podcast for Next Generation. You can find me on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, and I'm currently tweeting about my Deep Space Nine rewatch/watch. I'm on season 3. Woohoo! Trying to get it done for the 25th anniversary. And I am also on the Babel Conference, so you can find me there.
If you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron on the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more. Available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find the details at patreon.com/TrekFM.
Now, Patrick, I'm going to take you on 8 jumps. So, black alert. We would like to thank our associate producers that make our jumps into your podcast feed possible. They are Norman Lau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Puleo, Lisa Slack, Shoaib Mirza, Richard Rutledge, James Muldrow, and Cornelia Reutner. Hopefully Reutner didn't send us into the mirror universe that last jump there.
I think we're in trouble.
Uh-oh. Guys, thank you so much for supporting Trek FM and especially The Edge.
Thank you for listening, and join us next time to see what's happening on the edge of Federation space.